everyone, my name is Shaylin and I'm a chemistry student at Carnegie Mellon University. Now, I'm guessing that you saw the title of this module is Adaptation, the Perfect Fit. And I promise you, we're going to talk a lot about adaptation today. And if you don't know what that word means yet, that's totally fine too. But before we start talking about adaptation, I've got a challenge for you. I'm challenging you to do a few tasks. The first is to write your name. The second is to tie your shoes. And the third is to prepare your favorite snack. Sounds pretty easy, right? But wait, I challenge you to do all of these tasks without your thumbs. Specifically, I'm asking you to tape your thumbs to the palm of your hand like this. I know this sounds a little wacky, but trust me, you'll understand why we did this in a little bit. You might want to have a family member standing by in case things get messy. Ready? Go! So I'm not sure about any of you, but that was pretty tough for me. When I was going to write my name, it took me a little while to figure out the best way to hold a pencil without my thumb. I tried a few different methods, and eventually I got my name to look pretty good. Tying my shoes was more of a challenge. I had to hold the shoelace between my index finger and my middle finger, and it took me a lot longer to tie one shoe than it normally would. The snack that I chose to prepare without my thumbs was fresh popcorn, popped straight from the kernels. Now, this was very hard. Even things like opening bags or cutting a piece of butter took me twice as long without my thumbs. It was overall just harder to pick things up and move stuff around. Even grabbing that salt was a challenge. But at the end of the day, I think the popcorn turned out pretty good. I gave it 2 thumbs up. Well, you know what I mean. You might have noticed that the longer your thumbs were taped down, the more you got used to using your other 4 fingers to do things. Over time, you adapted to your environment and relearned how to do everyday tasks without your thumb. The word adapt means to change yourself or your behavior so that you survive better in your environment. Animals, even humans, are always adapting so that they have a better chance of survival. For example, let's look at polar bears and grizzly bears. They're part of the same animal family, but they have very different traits or characteristics that help them to survive in each of their environments. Over time, polar bears adapted to the Arctic weather by developing a thick layer of fur. Their fur was also white, which helped them to camouflage in with their surroundings, making it easier for them to sneak up on prey. Polar bears are much different than grizzly bears, who have brown fur to help them blend in with the forest background, and who hibernate during the cold winter months when there's not as much food to eat. Each of these animals come from the same family, but developed unique traits that helped them to survive in their environments, which were wildly different. If we put a grizzly bear in the Arctic or a polar bear in the forest, they probably wouldn't survive as well. The grizzly bear wouldn't have thick fur to survive in the cold weather, and a polar bear wouldn't be able to camouflage in with the green and brown forest, so they probably wouldn't be able to sneak up on their prey. Adaptation is the reason that we have so many different species of animals. Take out the Animal Analysis Worksheet and follow the instructions to research an animal and learn about its adaptations. Pause the video here and give it a try. When I did the animal analysis activity, I decided to research an animal that I see all the time where I live, a duck. Through my research, I found out that ducks can be found all over the world except for Antarctica, and while they do walk around on land, they spend a lot of time in water. They eat insects, seeds, and things that they find under the water, like plants, snails, and crayfish. Ducks can nap either on land or in the water. Ducks have many predators such as raccoons, badgers, foxes, and coyotes. Ducks tend to live together in large groups. Here are some neat ways that ducks have adapted to their environments. First off, I learned that a duck's feet are webbed, so they act like paddles to help the duck to swim. Ducks need to swim because they find a lot of their food underwater. Their flat, wide beaks help them to dig up food that's on the bottom of rivers, lakes, and ponds. I also discovered that a duck's outer layer of feathers is actually waterproof. Ducks produce an oil that coats their outer feathers, which makes them water resistant. Since their feathers don't get wet, ducks have an easier time floating on top of the water and also can stay warm even in icy cold waters. I hope you learned something new about the animal you studied and that you have a new respect for how these animals have adapted to survive over time. Something that's important to note, however, is that adaptation doesn't happen overnight. It can take many generations for an animal to adapt to its environment. Adaptations lead to a process called evolution. Evolution is the way that species have changed from their ancestors. An ancestor is like a great-great-grandparent. You are descended from your great-great-grandparents because you are below them on your family tree. An extraordinary example of a species evolving from its ancestor can be seen with giraffes. Based on fossil evidence, scientists believe that giraffes may have evolved from a shorter-necked creature. Over time, most food sources available to this creature came from leaves on trees. The shorter-necked creature had a difficult time reaching these high-up leaves. It is believed that at one point, one of these creatures experienced a mutation that caused it to have a longer neck. A mutation is a random change in the way an animal grows or behaves. The long-necked creature was able to reach its food more easily and was more likely to survive in its environment. Eventually, this creature had children that also had the long neck trait. The short-necked creatures were not able to survive as well and would die before they had children. Over time, more long-necked creatures survived, and a new species, the giraffe, was evolved. Many animals are believed to have a common ancestor, but since they grew up in different environments, they eventually branched off to form their own species. Scientists are still uncovering information about how animals are all connected in one family tree. They are doing this by looking at fossils and by testing for similarities in DNA. DNA is the blueprint for life that every species has, even humans. Now that we have talked a little bit about how adaptation leads to evolution, let's do an activity where we get to create a brand new species. Take out the Engineer an Animal worksheet and follow the instructions on the page to get started. What kind of animal did you come up with? Wow, that sounds really cool. I came up with a snow duck. From the animal analysis activity, I learned that ducks can be found pretty much everywhere in the world except Antarctica. So I wanted to create a duck that could survive in super cold, super snowy weather. Since the ducks would need to stay warm to survive, I put a layer of blubber underneath their outside feathers. Blubber is a type of fat that many animals in the Arctic have that help them to stay warm. I also decided to give my duck a white coat because I thought this would make it easier for it to blend in with the snow and hide from any predators. Lastly, I gave the snow duck a sharp beak, which could be used for piercing through the snow to catch bugs that live underneath, or to catch bugs flying around in the air. Now, all of my adaptations happen to be physical. They happen to be changes to the animal's body. However, there are adaptations that can be behavioral as well. Like the name suggests, these adaptations change the way an animal behaves or change the way that it lives its life. Here are some examples of behavioral adaptations that have helped a lot of species to survive over time. Number 1, hibernation. Hibernation is a practice where some animals will sleep all the way through the winter. This helps animals to survive who may not have thick coats of fur or animals who may run out of food sources in the winter. Grizzly bears hibernate through the winter in order to save energy and stay alive. Number 2, migration. Migration is when animals move from one place to another in order to breed or to avoid the cold. For example, Canada geese will move from Canada down to the United States to escape the cold. Then in the springtime, they migrate back to Canada for mating season during the warm weather. Number 3, communal living. Communal living is when species of animals will live together in packs. Living with many others can make it easier to work together to catch food or to protect young. Lions engage in communal living and live in groups called prides.
And those are just some of the examples of how animals have adapted by changing their lifestyles. Now that we've learned so much about adaptation, it's time to move on to our last activity, where we'll get an idea of how bird beaks developed into so many unique shapes and sizes. Let's go!
This experiment is inspired by the Galapagos finches. The Galapagos Islands are a collection of islands off of the coast of Ecuador in South America. Charles Darwin, a scientist famous for his work on evolution, traveled to the Galapagos Islands and discovered over 18 different species of finches. Finches are a type of bird. Darwin determined that the unique sizes and shapes of each of the bird beaks must have been a result of evolution. It seemed that the size and shape of each finch's beak depended on their diets. For example, a bird that ate seeds off the ground may have a strong, short beak, while a bird that dug around for insects may have a long, pointy beak. Darwin and other scientists concluded that each type of finch must have adapted unique beaks that helped them to survive best in their environment. In this activity, we will see what kinds of beaks work best for certain types of bird food. To get started, you will need several types of bird beaks. I used a spoon, scissors, a clothespin, and a pair of tweezers. You will also need different types of bird food. I used cut-up pipe cleaners, buttons, dry macaroni shells, and M&Ms. I thought that these things around my house would be good to represent the types of food that birds eat, like worms, seeds, snails, and beetles. If you don't have every single one of these materials, it's no problem. You can get creative with the things you find in your home. For example, you could use a plastic cup cut in half or chopsticks as a bird beak, and you could use beads or nuts as bird food. In addition to the bird beaks and the bird food, you will need a stomach, which can be a plastic cup or a jar, a timer, a pencil or pen, and the Feed Like a Finch worksheet. Using the Feed Like a Finch worksheet, fill out the table with the bird beaks and bird food you came up with. Write your bird beaks along the top row of the table and your bird foods down the first column of your table. This will help you to record your results. Count out 20 pieces of each type of bird food to use for your experiments. Once you've got each of your 4 piles, mix them all together and spread them out on a table or on the floor in front of you. Set up your bird's stomach next to the pile of food and also pick which bird beak you want to start with. I'm going to start with a spoon. Set a timer for 1 minute. When you hit start, use the bird beak to move as many pieces of bird food to the stomach as you can. Once your time is up, record how many pieces of food you were able to catch with your type of beak in the table on the Feed Like a Finch worksheet. To record your results, find the box that corresponds with the bird beak you used and the type of food you caught. Write down how much food of that type you were able to catch. After you've tried catching food with your first beak, repeat the whole process again with another beak. Spread out your food on the table, set a timer for 1 minute, and do your best to catch as much food as you can. Don't forget to record the results for each bird beak you used. By the end of the activity, every box in your table should contain a number. Do you notice any beaks that were better than others at catching a certain type of food? Write down your observations in the space provided on the worksheet. Pause the video here to complete the Feed Like a Finch activity. Good luck!
Hopefully you had fun doing that activity and have a better understanding of how finches all across the Galapagos developed different shaped beaks depending on their diets. Before we sign off, let's take a moment to review everything that we talked about today.
At the beginning of the lesson, I challenged you to do everyday tasks while your thumb was taped down. Although this was a silly exercise, it showed us the concept of adaptation, or changing yourself to survive better in your environment. Animals, plants, and bacteria have been adapting for billions of years so that they could survive better in their environments. Even animals that are part of the same family, like polar bears and grizzly bears, have evolved into different species due to the unique environments that they live in. In the animal analysis activity, you picked an animal and did some research to find out how its traits or characteristics helped it to survive. For example, I learned that a duck has webbed feet so that it can paddle through the water more easily. We demonstrated that each trait of an animal helps it survive in some way. Next, we talked about how adaptation can lead to evolution, or a change in a species from its ancestor. Over time, evolution has led to millions of different animal species, including the long-necked giraffe. Using our knowledge, we decided to engineer an animal that could exist in an environment that was the complete opposite of where it usually lives. We made sure to give the animal new traits to help it survive in its new habitat. But remember, adaptations aren't just physical. There are behavioral adaptations that change how an animal lives. Some examples of these behavioral adaptations are hibernation, migration, and communal living, or living in groups. Last but not least, we explored the adaptations of the Galapagos finches in the Feed Like a Finch experiment. By using different shaped bird beaks, we learned how the finches must have adapted depending on what food was available to them in their habitat. Interestingly, these finches were studied by a leading evolutionary scientist named Charles Darwin. He used the finches as evidence to prove his theory of evolution was true.
Overall, adaptation has been super important for the survival of species all across the world. To this day, living creatures are still adapting, and with big issues like climate change, some animals are being forced to adapt in new ways. We covered so many new topics that by now you are evolutionary experts. I want to thank you so much for tuning into this module, and if you liked the video you saw today, make sure to check out more at this website. We've got all sorts of videos, not just about science, but about math, technology, and engineering too. Once again, my name is Shaylin, and I hope to see you soon. Bye!